In the timeless dance of human ingenuity, the art of watchmaking stands as a marvel. From ancient sundials to today's fusion of tradition and technology, this craft has evolved. Imagine the Renaissance, birthing pocket watches, leading to the Industrial Revolution's mass-produced timepieces. Today, brands like Rolex blend craftsmanship with innovation. At the heart of the watch lies the escapement, the tourbillon, and the revolutionary quartz movement. But beyond mechanics, watchmaking is an art form. The hand finishing, the assembly, the quality control, all reflect excellence. Luxury watches are status symbols, investments, and expressions of style. They transcend utility to become something profoundly human. In these brief moments, we've journeyed through watchmaking, where engineering meets beauty, tradition embraces modernity, and time is cherished. I think with watches, a newbie like me is going to look at the face and what a watch looks like. Dan, can you kick us off? Since you're the master watchmaker among us, tell us, because I'm assuming that you look at the inside of the watch. Can you give us a sense
correct.
of what you really appreciate?
So as you usually dive into watches, a similar story. I grew up in my grandfather's watch and jewelry store, having Patek Philippe's, in my hands when I was 8 years old. He was had a huge vintage collection in his store, and that's what attracts you in the beginning. And you get the bug, just like anything else, and you may go out and the typical Rolex. You get yourself. You graduate from law school, you want to get yourself a present, and it's always the Rolex that starts the disease. It looks great, and then you realize you go to the first board meeting, and an older attorney might have something you haven't seen before, and that's a Patek Philippe, and you go, "What's that?" And then you learn, and you start to climb that ladder, and then you start to see the inside of what makes it go. And for a watchmaker, that's everything. It's not the fashion, it's not the curves and the look. It's there. But when we get to open the back, and especially someone like me who's spent countless hours inside of vintage timepieces, when most of it was handmade back then, even the series watches, when we would take off the back, which was not see-through back then, they all looked like Rolexes back then, right, Ariel? And we got to open the back. We're the only ones that got to see inside, and we would open per se one brand's watch and go like, "Wow, holy! Like how is that possible?" To get all that in there and do what it does when we turn it over and we see the hands. And then we get the next level up. You open up a Patek Philippe and see the finishing on something like that. And you literally just throw your tweezers down and just stand back and go like, it's not even, what human made this? Like, how did they do the finishing? Like, I wish the people could see this. And that's what I would do when I had my vintage repair stores. I would call them back, come behind my bench. This is your watch. Look what's inside. And then you climb that ladder as a collector and realize there's more worth than the dial in the hands. It has to reflect your personality. That's a huge part of watchmaking. We choose things all, in our life as we walk through life in all avenues to fit our personality, our character. Our car fits our personality. And once we have the ability to buy pretty much anything within realms that we desire. So watches are very similar to that. I mean, you climb that ladder, get all the way to the top of the brands. And then if somebody has a very large collection, they might get to the end and go, well, what's now? And then they find independent watchmaking, where each piece is unique. Mechanics can be made in independent watchmaking that aren't succumb to board meetings, monetary values, monetary outlay for the developer. It's the sky's the limit to create anything that can, that breaks rules. Like I'm always a rule breaker in my life. So my mechanics represent, breaking rules and things like that. And it's just that disease that keeps going, and it's a wonderful thing.
Ariel, where do you see the balance between traditional craftsmanship and technological innovation in watchmaking?
Andy, thank you for the question. I want to build upon what Dan was saying. watch collecting for me has what I call multiple vectors of appreciation. And that means that there's a lot of different ways to appreciate sometimes the same watch. As Dan explained, if you come from a watchmaking background, the movement and the craftsmanship and what I'll call the inherent value in regard to that is of the utmost importance. And that solidifies sort of your foundation of appreciation. You want to see well-made things that are well-engineered watches. But there are other vectors as well. And this is where taste comes into it. And as Dan said, personality, where you have to ask yourself, what do I care about? Some people don't know or care anything about that because it's beyond them. But you know what they care about? They care about popularity. Maybe they care about artistic design, or at various levels of refinement. Some people care about the jewelry element. Some simply care that there's a famous person in history who had it. These are all appropriate ways to appreciate the hobby. At the end of the day, the watch is designed to make you feel good. And I say this in sort of a tongue-in-cheek way. This is a selfish hobby. You do this to celebrate yourself. The watch is meant to not only reflect your personality, as Dan said, but it's also meant to validate who you are. And that's why we're drawn to these things, because we like validation. We like to have some positive reinforcement for the hard work that we get up and do every single day. And watches, for whatever reason, tend to be a very well celebrated way of doing this.
Where do you guys stand on like manual wind, automatic, or quartz?
I mean, look, if you get into the hobby long enough, you tend to really care about mechanical watches. It's beauty and engineering that the human eye can see. There's just as much fascination to quartz, but of course it lacks the ability to see it, the ability to make it with your hand. It requires a lot of other machinery, and therefore we don't have as much relatability. It doesn't feel alive. The number one thing people really seem to enjoy about mechanical watches is they see an analog to a living thing. They believe it has a sort of a heart rate. They can, with their own eyes, appreciate how this gear moves this, how this hand is controlled by this, and that creates a familiarity, like a little living pet on your wrist. And a lot of people, like quartz, has a whole other level of appreciation to it. I think there's an up and coming appreciation for high end quartz, but again, it's a slightly different vector of appreciation.
So as a watchmaker, let me build on everything something that Ariel said, which is all true. But from a watchmaker standpoint, we also look for value for money. We always, what I said previously was the mechanics played a large role because it takes 90% of the funds, the time, the sweat to build a micro machine. It's like putting a car engine on your wrist and reducing all those parts. So that's why we look at it that way. As we look at it, a quartz watch, we open the back up and we don't fix those. We go to buy them and they cost $39, but you're getting charged $6,000 for a watch. Whereas in mechanical watches, it's the complete flip. All the money goes inside what's inside, because that will last for generation, the generation. I don't need to find a broken coil in the year 3027, which doesn't exist anymore. And now your watch is trash. I can fix my watch for hundreds and hundreds, if not longer years, especially the ones that I build. So yeah, it's a personal thing, but you come to appreciate that. And that, especially now when almost all watches have see-through backs, you get to see the pain and struggle that we go through to build that crap, and somehow make it work with all those complications on top of complications. But there's something for everyone in watchmaking, exactly what Ariel said. There's a quartz watch for you. If you got $1,200 and that watch speaks to you, man, that could be your entrance way. That could be your finality. It could be your entrance way into collecting more. It could be your finality. You're happy. That's where you're at. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what's wonderful about watchmaking. There's something along every tier for everybody.
Yeah, so I have a lot of the same feelings, especially I want to agree with what Ariel was saying, because as an economist, you have to wonder, why do people buy watches, especially mechanical watches? Because I walk around, I go to Starbucks, and nowadays hardly anyone is actually wearing a watch, whether it's quartz or mechanical, unless it's the Apple Watch. It's usually a bare wrist, right? And the fact of the matter is, as a society, we no longer depend on, mechanical time devices, to run our business. So, I really agree with what he was saying, is that you're buying a feeling. There's a personal connection that you might have, like in my case with my personal history, my childhood, or you admire maybe a nostalgia for an older time. But basically, it's in that sense, because it's unnecessary, it's a luxury item, and you're trying to capture a feeling. You know, I'm gonna go against the grain a little bit here because I actually do love quartz watches, and the reason I say that is because from an economics perspective, I admire quartz in terms of its accessibility. It's allowed timekeeping and very accurate timekeeping to be made available to millions, hundreds of millions of people. We know how many sales, the G-Shock has sold. I think it's over 100 million uh, pieces over the last 10 years. So I admire it in that sense. But I do agree that how I feel about mechanical versus quartz watches is different. The way I find myself relating to those watches, that when I'm busy and I'm running around and I need to get things done, I wear my G-Shock. I wear a quartz watch because I don't have the mental energy to appreciate a mechanical piece. But when I'm, for example, sitting down, I'm into art. I like to draw. I really love to fiddle with my watch. Right now, I'm sorry you can't see this, but I'm wearing my Explorer, the 214270 reference. Um, and I love to kind of fiddle with it. I'm taking a break from drawing, so I'll put it on the table, put it back on my wrist, take it off my wrist, you know. And so you do have a different relationship between quartz and mechanical.
Dan, what about the tradition versus technology as a builder? Like, do you use metal components, or do you use like more modern components over time?
Well, because I've seen watches that come across my bench so often that have stood the test of time, and countless other hackmeisters that have been inside it, chiseling away, who shouldn't have been in there. Most of us in independent watchmaking do try to stick with the traditional metallurgies, which are still very hard to find. But we do utilize other materials, trying to push forward because we have those options now. We have machines that can cut those metals. We have CNC now. We have lasers. Well, back then we couldn't. Most of the parts were stamped. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with using cutting edge materials. The problem we all had, and I keep referencing independent, just means most of my friends who are just watchmakers building timepieces from bare raw metal. We get big stick of German silver, and out of that somehow, some way, we can build timepieces. The problem we have with futuristic metals and futuristic hairsprings, especially, and other stuff, is we usually were repair people, and we like to make sure that if you're going to spend that amount of money on a timepiece, that your son and his son and his son, who eventually get your mechanical timepiece, can actually have it, every single piece of that watch, repaired. That's what we strive to do, as I strive to do as an independent. Everything that's in my timepiece can be repaired by a traditionally trained watchmaker forevermore. So your investment is solid across the board. So that's what the problems I had that I spoke about earlier about other types of timepieces, because none of us need time on our wrist anymore. Let's be honest. We don't. And that's why independent watchmaking has exploded. It's not a little guy in a little barn on top of a Swiss mountain alone anymore. It's a full-blown, massive industry with the big brands actually trying to copy all of us because we're the innovators. It's no different than when I started Anthrax and thrash metal music. When people said, you can't play that music so fast, nobody's going to buy it, we're not going to sign your band. You have to be innovative, and you have to stick with what's going to last forevermore, and be true to yourself. And I know most of my friends at this level of independent watchmaking have the same feelings as I do. We really like to take care of the person that's investing. And it shows. Look at all the auctions at Philippe's and Sotheby's. Most of my friends' watches, maybe whatever price they sold them for, they're up in the millions now. It's incredible what's happening in watchmaking. And we don't need time on our wrist. So it's become art, mechanical art. That's what we are. That's what I call myself now. I don't even say I'm a master watchmaker. I'm a mechanical artist. I create mechanical art. You don't need a watch. Nobody needs a freaking watch anymore. So it is a personal thing, like you said, and very personal.
It's encouraging to hear that the artist is alive and well, that the artist can create something truly unique, and then maybe the mass market is trying to figure out how do we do that.
How is that any different than Anthrax, Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth coming out and then everybody else following suit? We break the rules. Nobody will sign our music. Nobody will put it out. So we go out in vans and we prove on tour that look at all these hundreds of thousands and then millions of people showing up, and I'm playing to 100,000 people at a show, and Carl thinks he's nervous on here. You know, play with that many people, and then all of a sudden other bands go, oh, wait a minute, that's cool. Let's jump on the bandwagon, you know? So it's got to be innovators in everything. But, you know, watchmaking it's just an incredible, fast array of everything. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just out there for everybody to enjoy.
Yeah, my thoughts on this is I like to segment the market. An economist would think about this in terms of mass produced versus job shop, and by job shop, I mean that in the most complimentary way, especially in terms of customization. So when we talk about, craftsmanship and innovation and which pieces are works of art and worth buying or investing in, I think, there's a clear distinction in my mind, and I think the mind of lots of watch collectors, the difference between mass produced, machine produced, and the kinds of, pieces that Dan produces. Obviously his stuff is on another level. And I wish I could afford it, but I don't. On my civil servant salary, I think that's out of my reach.
But
I want to make
people should be educated, especially if they're investing. If you're spending a lot of money, no matter if it's a Rolex, a Breitling, an Omega, or you're working your way up that tier, you should really do your research as you did in anything else you purchase, and know that most of my friends who are independents are ghost builders for most of their career before they even made their own watch for the big brands that you think you're buying and putting on your wrist. It's my friends who are making those original movements that go inside those timepieces. They're not making the case and the stylistic type things. But when big companies want a complicated timepiece, they don't usually do that within their walls. They go outside to us independents because we have the machines now. We have the same machines they have in our facilities here that I have here, and we have that time to create things that they wouldn't monetarily, want to channel their money towards. It would be a losing proposition for them at a conglomerate level.
For the context of collectors, I want to draw an analog to the automotive world because there's often a little bit more understanding. And I look at how people focus on old cars of a certain age because they can be repaired. And I know a lot of people who collect classic cars sort of stop in the 1980s because that's when a lot of electronics comes on board. And if you want to enjoy something old, because it's old, it's going to break and you need to fix it. And so there's a very practical reality that there's certain old watches that you can fix. And there are certain old watches or maybe not as old, but no longer produced watches that you cannot fix. And a lot of the old Quartz watches, for example, don't have a large amount of people that can fix them. And sometimes there's no one out there that makes the parts. Electronic parts require a lot of industrialization to produce. And once those machines and those assembly lines are gone, you're not going to be able to produce those things. One craftsman, a craftsperson cannot necessarily reproduce that. Imagine if they had to take a whole quartz oscillator and make it from scratch, grow the quartz crystal, cut the quartz crystal, wrap the coil, all this stuff. It would be insane. And you couldn't really do it. So there is a very practical reality if you're interested in older watches that there's some that you can get repaired. And today, it's a very interesting question as to what watches will have that future collectibility based upon there being some individual somewhere in the world who's able to repair it. Because at the end of the day, this isn't jewelry. It's not art. It doesn't just sit there and look nice. If you enjoy it, you're often going to use it for its mechanical purposes because that's part of the enjoyment, and you're going to need to fix it.
Great point. Let's move to segment 2.